Some of the most exciting news that has come with the new administration is the selected director of the Department of Health and Human Services, and that is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And today we're going to take a look at some of his critiques. It seems like there's a lot of backlash. Um, of course, can't uncomparable to the amount of support and excitement. But there's also a lot of backlash, and we're going to take a look as to what they're saying and try to break all of that down. But before we do, make sure to subscribe to my channel for more health and homesteading content. So let's dive in. I thought this article would be a really interesting one to dissect because it's from the New York Post, which is not like I would say, credible news source in general, but it's also more conservative leaning. And considering this is a conservative, largely conservative administration, and it has had a number of Democrats that have left the Democratic Party join this administration, like RFK and Tulsi Gabbard. I find this particular article really interesting, and we'll talk about why. The headline here is putting RFK Jr. in charge of health breaks the first rule of medicine. Let's see what they're talking about. The overriding rule of medicine is first, do no harm. Sounds like something that RFK would agree with. We're certain installing him to head breaks this rule. Maybe he's sworn to focus narrowly on ideas where he can clearly help, inspiring Americans to embrace healthier diets and more exercise. But we sat down with RFK back in 2023 when he was still challenging President Biden for the Democratic nomination. As we noted then, he's an independent thinker who sees through a lot of bull, and incisive critic of some of Biden's worst policies, who saw that the Democratic Party lost its way most acutely in reaction to Donald Trump's first election. But the insights we were impressed with had nothing to do with health. Health. Okay. When it came to the topic, his views were a head-scratching spaghetti of what we can only call warped conspiracies, and not just on vaccines. Wow, that's a lot to unpack. Let's talk about maybe what those topics were. Neocons are responsible for America's policy ills. Pesticides, cell phones, ultrasound could be driving an upswing in Tourette syndrome and peanut allergies. This is kind of funny. A radical, prolonged, and confused transition ordered by a guy like RFK, who will use his high office to spout his controversial beliefs, leaves a lot of room for things to go wrong. He told us with full conviction that all America's chronic health problems began in one year in the 1980s when a dozen bad things happened. Convincing to the gullible, conspiracy-hungry crowd on Twitter, but not to the rest of us. In fact, we came out thinking he's nuts on a lot of fronts. Just pause there for a sec. I hope that when the majority of Americans read news headlines, they can establish the difference between like emotional opinion pieces versus just straight facts, like unopinionated, non-emotional, just straightforward information. That's when I started to question mainstream media, was actually after 2016, after Trump got elected the first time, because we watched PBS NewsHour every night. And it seemed like information was pretty straightforward, although I know that the, narrative of mainstream media has been skewed for long before that, of course. But that was a turning point because everything seemed so emotional. It didn't feel very straightforward. I didn't feel like I was really getting just the news. And so whenever I read something like this, I'm thinking to myself, wow, they're not reporting a lot of specifics here. The only thing I've taken from it is that they're saying that he's a quack for saying that vaccines cause issues, glyphosate, EMFs, radiation, and we're going to unpack some of that. Even when he makes fair points as a critic, it's hard to see how he is the guy to lead HHS and its staff of 83,000 to practical solutions. The relationship between Big Pharma and the feds is deeply dysfunctional, for example, but drug companies do a lot of good and employ a lot of people. Okay, so that's why we should keep going with the system as it is, because they do a lot of good and they employ a lot of people. Sending the industry or even just its stocks into a tailspin would be a disaster. His views also put him at odds with Trump's aim of supporting energy and farmers, as RFK wants to ban fracking and many pesticides and fertilizers. Obviously, he had no hand in helping Joel Salatin get picked along with Thomas Massie for regenerative farming. Obviously, he is completely unqualified, but he is very much an advocate prior to this position being awarded to him or suggested for him. He is very well aware of organic agricultural practices, permaculture practices. He's spoken about this for a really long time. But I digress. The HSS chief oversees over 100 programs across 11 operating divisions. Keeping the trains running is a major job in its own right. And we're talking about operations like the CDC, NIH, FDA. A radical, prolonged, and confused transition ordered by a guy like RFK will use his high office to spout his controversial beliefs, leaves a ton of room for things to go wrong and for people to wind up harmed or even dead. That's terrifying. All of that, of course, is if the Senate actually confirms RFK, which will be a challenge in its own right. Republicans only have 3 votes to spare. Trump won a promise to fix the economy, the border, and soaring global disorder. His team needs to focus on delivering change on those fronts, not spend energy either having to defend crackpot theories or trying to control RFK's mouth. We fear the worm that he claims ate some of his brain some years ago is contagious, and there's been an outbreak at Mar-a-Lago. Y'all, what in the world? Here's what we got from this. Here's what I got from this article, and tell me what you think. That RFK has major concerns about vaccines, glyphosate, radiation, and and is completely unqualified for the job, and that we should be focusing on border control and the economy and not health. Does that really make sense? Does any of that really make sense to anyone who reads it? Perhaps someone that has been so infiltrated with the media to hate everything despite its real meaning and consequence. But I do think a lot of people in 2020 woke up to the concerns around health. And every single time I've talked to a group of people about cancer, as an example, and I ask, how many people in the room with a show of hands know someone who has had cancer? Every single hand will pop up. That's not normal. So there's so much that we could unpack about RFK, his history, and why I think that he may be very well qualified, if not the best possible person for this job. But I just want to take one issue, just one, to break it down and make sense of, and that's glyphosate. Glyphosate is banned in other countries. It is an herbicide used in major farming practices. They sell it at Home Depot for people to use residentially. And it has been linked to cancer, hence why it's been banned in other countries. Well, it just so happens that RFK, in his previous job position as a lawyer, won a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against Monsanto, who makes Roundup. And he won. Let's look at that. So I'll link all of this for you. But this is a man, Dwayne Anthony Lee Johnson, who lived a modest life for 42 years and was devastated when he was diagnosed with terminal cancer in 2014. Now 46, he struggles with advancing illness. Johnson found sudden celebrity with a historic victory over one of the world's most powerful and controversial corporations, Monsanto. Here's a little 1-hour snippet of the trial. Now, RFK, of course, is not mentioned in this article by time, but this article does go into how he successfully sued and won after being diagnosed with non-Hodgkin lymphoma and after being drenched with the company's herbicides, which he sprayed as a part of his job as school groundskeeper. Here's an article by the Irish Central that talks a little bit more about RFK's engagement and this lawsuit. We're looking at a $290 million case that was won. There's so much great data to look into as to how toxins like glyphosate affect our health. It would not be easy to win a $290 million lawsuit against one of the biggest agricultural conglomerates in the world. Not easy, but it's been done. And that's one of many cases that RFK has won. And one of many examples in which he has stood up against big pharma and big ag and big time corruption. So my question is to you. Do you think he's equipped for the job? What is it going to mean now that he's going to be leading the CDC and the NIH and the FDA and have control over what the future of our health looks like and what's allowed and what's not? I'd love to know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching this video. And if you found it interesting, please make sure to like it and subscribe to my channel for more health and homesteading content.